It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Nancy Lincoln. She's an associate pastor at Woods Memorial Presbyterian Church in Severna Park, also the psychotherapist at Woods Counseling and Care Center, as well as Alli Holstrom. She's with the Anne Arundel County Partnership for Youth and Families, as well as on the Youth Suicide Action Team, and Nancy's also on the Youth Suicide Action Team. Welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. I'm going to step back in time for a minute, and then we're going to come back to present day. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Larry and Sherry Lakin of Severna Park, who you both know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They lost their 16-year-old daughter, Ellie, to suicide in 2015, and in that interview, they had told me they took part in a study, and during the course of the interview, I knew nothing about the study, and I went home that night or the next morning and looked into the study, which is called Adolescents Under Pressure, a new Durkheimian framework for understanding adolescent suicide in a cohesive community, published only a few months ago in September of 2016, authored by two sociologists, Dr. Anna Mueller of the University of Chicago and Dr. Seth Bruton from the University of Memphis. They were looking at a community which is known as pseudonym Poplar Grove, which they described in the study as a small, privileged community with an enduring adolescent problem centered on the sole public high school in the community. They referred to the community as a hotspot for suicides. They did interview 110 individuals. 19 suicide deaths that they were focus of the study occurred between 2000 and 2015. All of the focal suicide descendants were current or recent graduates of, again, the pseudonym of Poplar Grove High School, the only public high school in the community. This is a large school, they said, with approximately 2,000 students, is widely recognized for its high-achieving student body. For example, it's been recognized as a blue ribbon school by the U.S. Department of Education, and they wrote, during our field work, several youth suicides occurred, and at least 6 separate community events were held to promote awareness about suicide and generate funds for suicide prevention. When I spoke to you, Nancy, I had asked you about this study, which you were aware of, and you had indicated Anna Mueller came here 2 years ago because of the work she's been doing with adolescents. Is that correct?
She's been studying this she's a sociologist, and she has been studying this around the country and doing research all over the place, which is how she came to write this. And so we were really grateful for her presence here because she was able to come here last year and speak to us about some of the work that she does coming out of Memphis and now out of Chicago with studies in suicidology.
Right. One of the points in this study was that in return for sharing the findings, they wrote, and answering questions, they will continue to work with them, the community, to improve their suicide prevention efforts. That's written in the study. Dr. Mueller's coming back this month, is she not?
She is. She is going to be here on the 24th of February to talk about what she and her colleague and others have named, as I say again, across the country, as critical kinds of things for healthy development of adolescents.
Alli, I know that nobody in your field of work or Dr. Mueller herself cannot name Severna Park as Poplar Grove because of confidentiality agreements, and that's completely understandable.
It's very delicate. Yeah, absolutely. But I think the bigger thing to remember here is that what we're really looking for is not so much community specific as understanding from a sociological perspective, which is the thing that's unique that she brings to the table, understanding some of the social dynamics that occur in adolescent populations that contribute to issues like suicide or self-harm, and how we can impact those in a way that's going to improve our prevention efforts.
Anne Arundel County did an assessment of youth suicide, and they looked at the years 2008 to 2012. Several communities have higher than normal suicide rates or suicide attempts, including Pasadena, Arnold, Glen Burnie, Brooklyn, Crownsville, and Edgewater, and yes, Severna Park as well. So regardless whether Severna Park is indeed Poplar Grove, Severna Park, which is the community you're in, Nancy, has a problem, and you said you realized it because of your work with Woods, correct?
Well, this actually dates way back to 2007, 2008, whenever we all became aware that we had a number of self-harm and suicide issues in the community. And so we contacted the Bloomberg School for Public Policy, and they came down and they said, you can't do this by yourself. You need to create a community organization. And they were really the ones who came in and said, you need experts in the field, you need your faith-based organizations, your service organizations, your crisis response, education, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And that's how we formed, was a network for the whole county, actually.
Mm-hmm. There were actually several initiatives that were happening kind of in separate pockets of the county. So obviously I work for a county-level organization, so we're not looking at any one particular community. We're looking at the county as a whole. And so there were groups that were meeting inside Severna Park, the group that Nancy's affiliated with. There was a group inside the school system, because you can imagine the schools had a very vested interest. And then there was a separate group that was run out of my office, where by statute we're considered a neutral convener around issues that impact children and families, which is kind of how we got involved with this. So we had folks at our table who were from different county offices, the health department, the police department, crisis response, things like that. And shortly after the Bloomberg folks came in was when we realized that if we brought all these disparate groups together, we would really be able to meet all of the criteria that Bloomberg set out in terms of creating a real community level response.
Well, that's interesting. I know, that's fascinating. Whose idea was it to bring Bloomberg in?
It came through Woods Church. Henry Taylor, who was on the faculty up there, was the person who came down, and he became an active part of helping us to form as an organization. And so he continues to do that work, because the culture of a community affects so much how this is the impact of kids.
And kind of coinciding with that was there was a group, particularly the School System and Mental Health Agency, that were pursuing a federal grant to get some additional funds in the community to do suicide prevention work inside the schools and in the community at large. And so we needed a community advisory committee.
And so here it was. Is this Parenting for a Different World? Is that
grew out of all of that?
Okay, which is a collaborative outreach of community-based organizations in Severna Park. Who's involved with it, and what are the different elements?
The Parenting for a Different World is really a grassroots kind of organization that grew out of the suicide awareness programs. And right now, there are a number of volunteers from the community who came together and said, what can we do to impact our culture? And in this case, this is specifically focused with
adolescent suicide.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But we're moving away from trying to talk about reacting to suicide. We're talking about proactively creating something that fosters the healthy development, physically, spiritually, emotionally, of our young people in our community. So Parenting for a Different World has 4 branches, the 4 areas that are where most of our families are involved: sports, faith-based and service, education, and music and arts. And so each of those branches in Parenting for a Different World is being asked to address the coping, resilience, and help-seeking behaviors of our youth, and because that has come out of Dr. Miller's work,
right?
And that's what we're focused on.
And you had mentioned before the interview started, whereas we used to think of this issue, the suicide awareness and prevention issue, as teens, high school. You're now saying let's go back to middle school and start there.
Elementary school.
So we're trying to incorporate a sense of resilience and coping and like I say, help seeking right from the get-go for kids, so that we can just take suicide off the table as an option at all.
I love it.
Because one of the things that we learned, when we first started these initiatives, as Nancy said, back in 2007, 2008, I think we really got kind of off the ground and mobilized in a more formalized fashion, probably late 2008, early 2009. And at that point, we were really looking at an intervention model, right? How do we intervene with kids who are at risk for self-harm or suicide, get them identified as needing that assistance, and then get them into the hands of a mental health professional that can help them work through whatever their underlying issues are. And we did that, and we did that well for a while, but we realized that wasn't enough. And like a lot of things, intervention's only part of the puzzle, and the bigger piece of the puzzle is prevention. And so that was where Dr. Mueller's work became really important to us, because what we were trying to learn is what are the habits, what are the skills, what are the tools that our kids seem to be lacking that is creating this heightened risk in our community for acts of self-harm or suicide. And resiliency, coping mechanisms, and help-seeking behaviors were the things we realized our kids were lacking. And so the question became, well, how do we build those things?
Right.
And when do we need to start building those things? And what we learned is the earlier the better. So it's not just about giving those skills to kids who are in high school and middle school, but it's about how do we start working with our kids in elementary school so that we're teaching them those things that they can build on as they age, so that by the time they get to high school, where their risk for an attempt is going to be much higher, where they don't feel the need to do that because they have the tools in their toolbox.
Great idea. Have the schools and the parents been receptive to this?
Very, very. They've
Yes.
been very receptive. In fact, we had done a video called Empty Chair. We were raising awareness. That video was
Which is
used in our
amazing.
school. It is
Isn't that
good.
beautiful?
Yes.
Between that and the music that has been written with this, we have been able to be present in a number of places.
Things I wanna do, I got 100 reasons to get through the night, to build a life.
We're going to talk more about this very important topic. This is Donna Cole, the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is Nancy Lincoln, Associate Pastor at Woods Memorial Presbyterian Church. She's also a psychotherapist there. And Alli Holstrom, who's with the Anne Arundel County Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. They're both on the Anne Arundel County Youth Suicide Action Team, and they're both part of a collaborative effort that's sprung up in recent history on Parenting for a Different World. It's addressing an adolescent suicide problem that we have in the county and in Severna Park. We were just talking before we went to break if the schools and the parents have been receptive to this. One of the points in the study that we keep referencing by Dr. Mueller and Dr. Bruton was when they initially went into Poplar Grove, the community they referred to in the study, was that there's a stigma with mental health, suicide, gaining the trust of the community and individuals was essential to them, they said, but it was kind of difficult subject to broach because it's adolescent suicide, yes?
Absolutely. I don't think this is a problem we've solved by any stretch, but I think we have seen a significant shift since we really dug into this work in the late 2000s, where when we first started working on this, and Nancy, you can probably speak to this a little bit differently than I can, but on the one hand, there was a level of awareness in the community, right, that we were seeing suicide losses and what were we going to do. But when you would get down to the individual parent-child level, a lot of times families' responses would be, not my kid. Or there was a sense of fear or shame if they had a child who was struggling, that couldn't be publicly known for, in some fashion. And we had a lot of issues where suicide losses or suicide attempts were being framed differently for the community because, and understandably, families didn't want their children to be judged by one act.
And there's also a concern, and maybe a valid one, on contagion suicide, yes?
There is, but the downside to that kind of denial or screening or shielding of those events is it makes it harder to talk about at a community level or at a school level. And so it's a very fine line, I'm not going to lie, in terms of trying to figure out how do you acknowledge the problem and address the problem in a meaningful way without contributing to an issue of contagion. But that was a line that was even harder to walk at that point because you would have kids going, well, we know, I'm using air quotes, you can't see me on the radio, but we know what happened and you adults are telling us a lie, or we know more than you do, or there were some issues of adolescent to adult trust because they were hearing things from their peers that weren't being publicly acknowledged by the adults.
Well, I shared a piece on this on my social media where I actually heard community members referring to Severna Park High School in a very derogatory term, which I'm sure you've heard yourselves, suicide high.
Yep.
One woman had written that she had taken her daughter to a therapist in Severna Park who called it that name and said, I can't believe you didn't know. My question is, and the question of parents that are living there now, should they be concerned living in a community where there is a higher than normal suicide rate? How do they overcome this?
Yeah, I think that's an unfair stigma, although it's understandable, and I think that's why we've talked so much about doing a culture shift. One of the things that we're adamant about with Parenting for a Different World is not giving the impression that parents are doing something wrong, because they're not. One of the really positive pieces of communities like Poplar Grove is that the parents care passionately about their kids. And as you and I were talking about earlier, maybe sometimes we're a little bit too passionate in terms of trying to make sure that our young people get the best of everything that we can give them. And so we tend to protect them a little bit more than we ought to, probably. But in terms of Severna Park being a place you don't want to go because something's going to happen to your child, that's just not fair. And
I mean, I've had parents tell me they think Severna Park is very insular. Parents that have young kids, and I have friends that are parents of high school age kids that are saying the same thing. How do we keep fixing this problem?
So I'm so glad you asked that. So, and I'm going to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Nancy was saying. So in terms of, people have to stop looking at issues like suicide like it's a lightning strike. Just by virtue of moving into a community does not make you at a greater risk.
Right.
It's not something that happens to you. But there are cultural forces at play that can certainly contribute to those things. How do we change that? You know, not to go metaphysical, but we do have to be the change we want to see. I've done a lot of sessions at different conferences or trainings with PTAs, and when we talk about things like being willing to share struggles, right? Being willing to say, yeah, you know what, I'm having a hard time right now and I'm getting help for that and it's okay. You know, I've had parents who look at me and say, you know, Alli, I totally agree with you on that, but tell that to my neighbors, right? And my response has always been, you're somebody's neighbor too. Right. So it has to start absolutely grassroots. It has to be families willing to say, I'm willing to be the one that says, I don't get it all right the first time. Some things are hard and you need help, and that's okay. It's part of being a human. It's part of living. It's part of learning. It's part of growing, is struggle and asking for help and learning new things.
And maybe asking your kid, look, I know you've had a particularly stressful week. How are you feeling mentally? Not just, how's your headache doing, or how's that knee feeling?
Exactly. And being able to start modeling those behaviors, because that's contagious too.
Exactly. It's not just the young people that we're talking about. We're talking about families too.
Right.
Coping resilience and help seeking. And kids will learn from their parents. If, as you read that study, you'll find that communities like Poplar Grove do have high expectations. And I think part of what Parenting for a Different World is trying to do is to reevaluate some of, what does success really mean? What does achievement really mean?
And what is failure?
And what is failure?
So pushing kids academically to get into MIT and Harvard, maybe that's not the ultimate goal we should be looking at.
It's certainly not the priority in terms of a whole life scene for a person. It isn't that. It is about well-being in all the various aspects of well-being.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're trying to encourage, and that you see in a lot, like you're more likely to see them in things like sports or in
just
arts
about
and
to
music,
say,
is focusing on the process more than the outcome, right? What's the effort you put in, and giving that more weight and more importance than the ultimate result, right?
Which are the trophies and the league championships and the...
Which is why we focus on those four branches, those four areas: the music and arts and sports and education and faith-based and service. In each of those areas, each one of those places have an opportunity to not just teach, but to demonstrate and to live out those dynamics. It is okay to fail. In fact, we talk about it clinically. We talk about optimal frustration. It's absolutely necessary, because if you never have to suffer or struggle with anything, then something comes in and happens to you that your parents
Then
can't
what?
manage.
Yeah. All right, let's come back to that in a minute. We're going to take another short break. This is Donna Cole. This is the 1430 Connection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. I'm in the studio with Nancy Lincoln. She is associate pastor at Woods Memorial Presbyterian Church in Severna Park, also psychotherapist there, and Alli Holstrom with the Anne Arundel County Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. They're both on the Youth Suicide Action Team, and they are both part of a collaborative outreach within their community of Severna Park called Parenting for a Different World. They're addressing the adolescent suicide problem that is a relatively big issue in Severna Park, as well as other communities throughout Anne Arundel County and the United States. Faith, Nancy, it's obviously your line of work. Religion. We as a society and as a community and local community, I think we are becoming less faith-based. Do you agree?
That's what the statistics say, yes. There's a difference between faith-based in terms of an institution, though, and spirituality. And you'll see if you look at the data, people say, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Kind of hard to define the difference there, but yes, in answer to your question.
With regard to this issue, suicide prevention, your church is taking an active role in a community that has a problem with adolescent suicide. Do you think that's important?
It is important. Woods Church, as well as the other churches in Severna Park, are very aware of this, and we have worked closely together to provide responses to families and to the young people in the schools. We've also we have what we call Commitment to Life services, which are faith-based services, not necessarily particularly focused on any denomination or Christianity or Judaism or anything, but just in general, because anytime you have a question that involves life and death, you're talking about meaning. So these Commitment to Life services offer an opportunity for kids to be able to make a commitment again to the meaning of life and their own purpose and their own calling in life, because everybody has one.
For those that shy away from those institutions, the synagogues, the churches, this group, Parenting for a Different World, isn't trying to...
Absolutely. No. In fact, we are very clear that the faith-based and service is one of the branches, because both faith-based places and service organizations are about community, and that's really what Parenting for a Different World is about.
This is all about community. This is let's make a change in our community, and our community does need this change.
Yes.
You officiate over funerals. Yes. You saw this issue firsthand.
Yes.
In that must be very difficult.
It is very difficult. It is very difficult. Parents are not supposed to outlive their kids.
You have a very important program coming up at the end of the month at Severna Park Community Center. Alli, you want to talk about that?
Sure, I'm happy to. So on February 24th, Dr. Mueller is going to come back into town to really share and dig into the lessons learned through her study, and to give us some guidance on how we can be having these culture shifts among our adolescent populations and what the community role is in that. It's also the launch of our Parenting for a Different World initiative. This is really kind of our kickoff event. And so we wanted to bring, obviously, the data in, the research in, that provides the backbone to what we're doing. But the other piece of that event is really to start exploring those 4 branches that we talked about with our community members. So we're bringing in experts from the sports community, from arts and music, from faith and service, and from education to speak to what their piece of this looks like, and to help the community start figuring out what role do they want to play, what part do they want to play, how do they want to work this into their families, to their communities, to their lives.
Who should come to this?
Everybody.
Especially?
I would say especially parents. But honestly, if you are someone who touches the life of a child, are you an aunt and uncle? Are you a neighbor? Are you a babysitter? A grandparent? Do you mentor? Do you teach classes? Do you coach? This is relevant to you because it's going to give you some really important information about not just the issue broadly around suicide and self-harm and kind of the underlying behaviors, but on a broader scale, what are the lessons that we can be teaching to kids? What are the things we should be lifting out of the work that we're doing and showing to kids and saying, hey, you know how you do this here? It applies in other places. And this thing that you've learned to do here can really help you over here in this part of your life, and help them draw those connections and help them recognize that they have some of those tools in their toolbox, and figuring out kind of on a broader scale too, what role can I play? How can I be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem?
Now, you've told me how you've reacted with, and these organizations have reacted with the study. Do we know if in the schools in Severna Park in particular, added resources have been brought into play because of the study?
Absolutely. We've done, they have allowed and brought in QPR training, and you could speak to that more since you have done that. Severna Park High School specifically has a STAR program, which they began several years ago.
Yeah.
And that's also a piece of education for this. So we have found the schools to be very supportive.
And they're partnering with you on this upcoming event as well, and helping to promote it.
They
Yes.
are.
Yeah, and
They
Alli, do you have
absolutely
anything else to add? I have had, I put in a call to the schools and an email to the schools. I have yet to hear back from them, so I'm awaiting them. I am also having, as I mentioned, Jen Corbin
Yes.
from the Crisis Center coming on, and this has become a series because it's an important topic.
Right.
So she'll be a guest on a future show.
And she will be a fantastic source of knowledge. Jen is a great partner. We work very closely with Jen,
Right.
and she has been a gift to this community.
She's with the Anne Arundel Crisis Center for those.
She is,
Yeah.
and the community as a whole, across the whole county, has been really helpful. We will be doing that fundraiser at Ram's Head on the 12th of March.
Okay.
With Revolution Child, and that is also, we've partnered with Ram's Head in being able to do this kind of work. So it's
Are you at 501c3 status yet with Parenting for? Or are you going for?
not yet. We're
okay.
going to be
All right.
trying to do that.
To go back to the school thing, though, really quickly, I want to say that the study was helpful, but the schools were aware and acknowledging and being proactive
Way
long before
that.
the study happened.
They went back to at least 2007 when we began this.
In fact,
Absolutely.
so I kind of referenced early on that there was a federal grant, and they were really the impetus behind getting that federal grant and bringing those dollars here into Anne Arundel County. And part of that was, one, they did suicide prevention training for every staff member in every public school. It took us 3 years to do it, and I was part of that initiative. Nancy was part of that initiative, but they felt strongly that they needed to give these tools to all of the people. So from the cafeteria worker all the way up to the principal in every public school in our
amazing.
county. Yeah. And they have refreshers now that they do with staff every year.
Nice.
They also really partnered with the community to develop a better mental health curriculum inside the schools for both middle and high school students. One that had a better suicide prevention piece that aligned really nicely with QPR, which is what Nancy referred to, which is Question, Persuade, Refer. It's a gatekeeper training model around suicide prevention. So that we
Question,
felt like,
persuade, refer. Okay.
how do you ask the question of someone who's suicidal? How do you persuade them to get help? And then where do you refer them to?
Okay.
It's a great tool that anybody can use if they're worried about someone. So we looked at things. They got input from parents, from youth, from educators, from health experts, from mental health experts before they selected their new
Let me ask you about something.
criteria. Yeah.
Are there enough mental health professionals?
God, no.
Okay.
Not really.
Sorry.
No, and the other issue we have is that we have no psychiatric adolescent beds in Anne Arundel County.
Yeah.
All right. Ladies, once again, where can people find out about this program you're having on the 24th?
The community center's website.
Severna Park Community Centers.
SP Community Center.
spcommunitycenter.org.
Correct. And Parenting for a Different World, we have a new website that's just launching. We're still building it, but it's pdworld.org.
Okay, so stay tuned for that. If you're a parent, if you work with children, if you're anywhere near kids, particularly in the Severna Park area, make sure you have to RSVP to this for this
don't
program
have
on the
to, but
24th.
we would like to
But
be able to
the
go.
community center holds a lot of people. Yes.
850.
Okay.
We'd love to fill that gym.
WNAV will continue to promote this, and as I said, this is a continuing series. It's an important topic.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ladies, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
This is Donna Cole. This has been the 1430 Connection. We'll see you next week.